The Johnson & Johnson vaccine paused over blood clots. Deja vu from last summer in Minnesota. And Biden says he will withdraw troops from Afghanistan. That and more on this week's headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. On Tuesday, the U.S. recommended a pause in the use of single-dose Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccines to investigate reports of blood clots. Officials say this pause is out of an abundance of caution, while anti-vaxxers say, "I told you, sheeple!" These blood clots were found in 6 women between the ages of 18 and 48, with one being fatal. Now, that sounds scary, but it's worth noting that over 7 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine have been administered to date. So 6 known blood clots in almost 7 million? Those odds are less than 1 in a million. To put that in context, your odds of getting struck by lightning are double that, at 1 in 500,000. Which means everyone needs to stop panicking about blood clots and start panicking about lightning. You want to get nuts, lightning? Let's get nuts. What's that, Shelley? The metal in this blade will attract lightning? You see, lightning is a way bigger menace. Dr. Peter Marks, director of the FDA's Vaccine Center, said, "We know there are plenty of critics who say, why? It's just a couple of cases. Why don't we just move along?" We don't have a lot of tolerance for that, and that tends to undermine vaccine confidence. So we simply have to do whatever we can to minimize or eliminate issues that might be considered friendly fire. I'm not trying to downplay this. I am worried about people's health, mainly because after being vaccinated, a lot of people will start eating at Golden Corral again. Forget COVID. There are way deadlier diseases lurking in their chocolate fountains. So if you got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, don't worry. No need to panic. That said, one of our joke writers recently got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So if you notice a sudden dip in the number of jokes per episode, there's no punchline here. Okay, maybe panic just a little. Moving on. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham signed legislation this week to legalize recreational marijuana. This bill will legalize recreational marijuana use within months and allow for the sale of it by next year. Good thing New Mexico didn't also legalize recreational meth. Then Breaking Bad would have only been 1 episode long. Walter White quits his job as a chemistry teacher to become a licensed pharmacist. Governor Lujan Grisham explained her reasoning for signing the marijuana bill, saying, "It is good for workers, it is good for entrepreneurs, it is good for consumers. And it brings about social justice in ways in which we've been talking about and advocating for decades." These sentiments seem to be shared by a lot of other governors. New Mexico is the 7th state since November to legalize weed. Governor Lujan Grisham might also be hoping that if New Mexicans smoke enough weed, they'll forget about the sexual harassment settlement she just paid. Although, I don't think that strategy is really working for New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. You know who's not a fan of legalizing marijuana, though? President Biden. But Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said the Senate will move forward with federal marijuana legalization with or without President Biden. According to Senator Schumer, Biden is studying the issue, so I obviously want to give him a little time to study it. I want to make my arguments to him as many other advocates will. But at some point, we're going to move forward. Period. Schumer also said, "I think the American people started speaking with a clear message, more than 2 to 1, that they want the law changed. When a state like South Dakota votes by referendum to legalize, you know something is out there." In response to this, the state of South Dakota said, "Harsh, but fair." It makes sense Joe Biden is hesitant to legalize marijuana, though. After all, marijuana makes you slow, sleepy, crave sweets, say ridiculous things, and come up with crazy half-baked ideas. Biden just can't relate to any of that. Marijuana may give you the munchies, but if you want to get groceries, you're going to need a different type of green. Find out what I mean after the break. Welcome back. If this pandemic that caused you to lose your job, home, and grandma wasn't enough, then good news. Inflation will cause you to lose your savings too. Consumer prices rose 2.6% over the last 12 months, and this inflation is expected to last the rest of the year. Since February, prices have increased by 0.6% overall, the largest price jump since August of 2012. And gas prices shot up 9.1% last month, so that's even more money out of your paycheck. Unless you don't drive to work because you're unemployed, then it's not so bad. But if you're a millennial worried about your savings losing value because of inflation, it's not a big deal. Everyone knows millennials don't have savings to lose. 2 recessions and a pandemic in our lifetime. Gee, I wonder why so few of us can afford homes. But don't worry, millennials, because no one else can get a house either because of the huge housing shortage, which is leading to the craziest real estate market since 2008. So if you are a millennial with savings, forget the house. It's time to buy all of the avocado toast. All of it. Meanwhile, the White House says that this inflation bump is just transitory. It's not like the government is going on a spending spree that could make inflation worse. To cope with all this, more states will be legalizing marijuana. But if you're hungry and looking for a cheap way to get meat, there is some good news. A new law in Wyoming will allow people to eat roadkill. So next time you're in Wyoming, you can harvest some cheap meals on your own. Or take advantage of Arby's new Wyoming exclusive dollar menu, featuring possum sliders and armadillo fingers. I recommend the honey mustard with those. They don't taste great, but who can turn down a deal in this economy? At least it's healthier than Golden Corral. Okay. I shouldn't pick on Wyoming. After all, it's also legal to eat roadkill in 30 other states, including New York and New Jersey. You know what that means. Arby's new dollar menu is now nationwide. For our next story, stop me if you've heard this one before. Civil unrest broke out in Minnesota after a police officer killed an unarmed black man. Heated protests spread nationwide, and reporters debated over whether to call these riots. And I thought Hollywood was out of new ideas. At least Hollywood waits more than a year before rebooting a story. You're getting lazy, reality. Mike Elliott is mayor of the city of Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, where the shooting death of Daunte Wright took place. He called for immediately firing the officer who shot Wright.
We cannot afford to make mistakes that lead to the loss of life of other people in our profession. And so I do fully support releasing the officer of her duties.
However, when asked about firing the officer, here's what Brooklyn Center City Manager Kurt Bogany said.
All employees working for the City of Brooklyn Center are entitled to due process with respect to discipline. This employee will receive due process, and that's really all that I can say.
Wow, a response that emphasizes following due process. We can't have that. Seriously, we can't. Kurt Bogany has been fired as city manager. The day after Bogany was fired, the officer who shot Wright, Kim Potter, resigned from the police force. Potter was arrested and charged with second-degree manslaughter the day after that. Man, Bogany should have just kept his mouth shut. That'll teach him to try and go by the book. It's a good thing Mayor Mike Elliott fired Bogany. After all, what better way to combat someone in a position of authority leaping to conclusions, ignoring procedure, and abusing their power than having a person in a position of authority leaping to conclusions, ignoring procedure, and abusing their power? Several days after the shooting of Daunte Wright, protests are still raging in Minnesota. But hopefully, with Kim Potter's arrest, peace will soon return to Minneapolis. At least until next week, when jury deliberations begin on the Derek Chauvin trial. Depending on the verdict, Mortal Kombat may not be the most violent story reboot we see this month. More after the break. Welcome back. The Biden administration expelled 10 Russian diplomats and announced sanctions against dozens of people and companies. According to the White House, these actions are a retaliation against the Kremlin for interfering in last year's election, as well as a SolarWinds breach, where Russian hackers allegedly infiltrated 9 agencies to gain government secrets. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, "These actions are intended to hold Russia to account for its reckless actions. We will act firmly in response to Russian actions that cause harm to us or our allies and partners." The Biden administration now joins the Trump administration in a bipartisan tradition of expelling Russian diplomats. It apparently does nothing to change Russia's behavior. Our next story is about a brave hero who's made it their goal to combat climate change. Of course, I'm talking about corporate America. Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Coca-Cola are calling on the Biden administration to set climate goals that would cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. Calling themselves the We Mean Business Coalition, they wrote in a letter to Biden saying, "New investment in clean energy, energy efficiency, and clean transportation can build a strong, more equitable, and more inclusive American economy." Makes sense. If there's anyone who understands clean energy, it's Coca-Cola. And if you love doom and gloom climate change models to distract you from all the other ways you could die, like lightning, here's a great one. A group of scientists in California are predicting the western U.S. will enter a mega drought, the worst in 1,200 years. There's a chance this could result in a permanent drought, which large portions of the western U.S. would be unable to recover from, considering their reoccurring dry winters and summers. To fight this drought, there's clearly only one thing Joe Biden can do. He needs to hire world-renowned experts on moisture, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion. President Biden announced that troops will leave Afghanistan by September 11th this year, the 20th anniversary of the World Trade Center attacks.
I've concluded that it's time to end America's longest war. It's time for American troops to come home.
Biden said the withdrawal will begin on May 1st, in line with an agreement the Trump administration made with the Taliban. Although Biden wants to make clear, it's all him, not Trump. The troop pullout would mark a symbolic end to America's longest war, which has lasted 20 years. Some of you may not be old enough to remember September 11th, but you are old enough to be sent to Afghanistan to die for it. I'm not celebrating America's exit just yet, though. After all, removing troops from Afghanistan has also been promised by President Bush, then Obama, then Trump, and now Biden. So forgive me if I can't help but think this is a promise we may hear yet again from President Kamala Harris, then President Ron DeSantis, then President Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. President The Rock may not be able to get us out of Afghanistan either, but at least he can lay the smack down. So, what do you think about the stories we covered this week? Leave your comments below. And remember, America Uncovered is supported mainly by viewers. Be sure to visit patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.